Okay, hello everybody and welcome. I've got some feedback here, sorry about that. Welcome to the webinar on a key technique that CEOs use to persuade in only 18 seconds, and a warm greeting here from Lancashire in the northwest of England. So over the next, initially for the first 20 minutes, I'll take you through the steps that how I discovered this and how you can discover some steps to use it yourselves. And then the last 15-20 minutes, I'll give you 3 different examples of stories, which I think you'll find really helpful and useful. So the first question is, just imagine in whatever you do, you could have more influence. What would you do with it? Would it give you more leadership success? Would you sell more? Or would you be able to just do your job more effectively? In whatever it is we do, to be able to lead, we need to have influence. Now, as I've been introduced already, I'll jump over this quickly. I'm Julian Atherley, and over the next 18 minutes, I'll show you what I discovered about how effective leaders motivate by turning their message into a powerful, compact, what I've called story message. I'll also share with you why we often get it so wrong. And I'll also then show you my 5 simple steps that you can use to increase your impact and effectiveness. These are steps that I actually use every day in my consulting work. Now, a little bit of the background. After working for one of the majors in Germany, I worked for Germany's biggest management consultancy. Then I went out and set up my own consulting business. I managed to build it up to 7 figures, and I had a lot of the nice toys and things, but marketing was always a struggle. And my problem is that we are all around persuading clients to buy. We used to be in feast and famine, and I think I've probably read just about every textbook on sales, on marketing, on networking. I'd like to think I learned a lot, but then I really noticed something interesting, something that leaders were all doing. And I think it's fairly clear, all successful people tell great stories. That should be kind of obvious because they're successful, so they've got great stuff to talk about. But what I didn't realize is that their ability to tell great stories is a key part of their success. They have become successful in part because they can convert their experiences into great stories. And what really brought it home to me was a little story that I've called The Gas Man, and I'll share more detail of this with you at the end. But this is how a friend of mine, when he was competing against other entrepreneurs, he wanted to raise 10 million, and they were appearing at an entrepreneur's roadshow with investors, and he used a simple story to really get everybody engaged, and he raised $10 million, while his competitors all produced lots of great presentations of facts and data, but he got the money. And I'll share that story with you later, but that really brought it home to me, the power of a simple story. And then I'd like to just share with you what I consider to be actually a bit of a myth, particularly in the modern era. You may all be familiar with that phrase, a picture can paint 1,000 words. But actually, we're not only in an era of data overload, but with social media, we also now have image overload. And I'd like to suggest to you that actually a few good words will do more for you than 1,000 pictures. So stick with me, and over the next 18 minutes, you'll discover why I use a 3 times 18 rule, why it's so important, and my 3 biggest secrets to creating high impact story messages, which help me deliver change, help me in my consulting work, help me persuade people, and makes my life a lot more easier, and I think it'll help you too. So before we do that, how do successful leaders motivate others? Well, the first thing to remember is you haven't got much time. You don't have time for a long story. You have around maximum 18 seconds to attract and engage their interest. If after 18 seconds you haven't got people's interest, you haven't got them curious, you haven't got them engaged, it's almost impossible to persuade them. Not totally impossible, but it's unlikely, and it's a lot of hard work. So those first 18 seconds are absolutely critical. Now, what is the one thing we need if we want to lead people? It's persuasion. It doesn't matter how important we are. It doesn't matter how powerful our position is. If we can persuade people, we will be much more effective. And that, by the way, also includes organizations like the military, where there's a very clearly defined chain of command. But when I'm working with former military officers, they all tell me that actually the chain of command is one thing, but actually persuasion is much more powerful. So, of course, the next question is, how do we persuade? And social scientists and neuroscientists have done this. This isn't for me, but basically persuasion takes place when we win people's hearts and minds. That's how we can convince people. That's how we can persuade them. Excuse me. So I think it's fairly clear. We can use data and facts to win people's minds. So we can get the intellectual argument won. But how do we win people's hearts? How do we get that emotional connection? Well, and again, this isn't from me, but this is pretty well documented, that actually stories are the best way of connecting hearts and minds if we tell stories. In fact, we all grow up with them. In all countries and all cultures, storytelling is a huge part. Excuse me. I'm getting some feedback. Excuse me, I'll just stop that for a second. That should be better. So stories are a huge part of our childhood. It's what we grow up with. And of course, in sales and marketing, they know how to use stories too. They use them all the time. And in fact, it's now got so well established that major organizations are actually creating a role and have a role of chief storytellers. So you get big organizations like SAP, US Airlines, World Bank, they have a chief storyteller role. And of course, we all tell each other stories all the time. Now, what I've called story messages, these are the fastest way of connecting hearts and minds, because we don't have time to tell long stories. So we need to combine the power and effectiveness of a great story with the speed of a quick anecdote. And we need to do it with a powerful structure so that we can basically win hearts and minds in only 18 seconds and engage people, persuade them. And that's what gives you that extra influence to get things done quicker and faster. So the next thing to make clear is what a story message is not. It's not about having nice PowerPoint presentations. It's not about having a nice website, brilliant infographics, nice videos. And surprisingly, it's not about great public speaking skills. So what is a story message? Well, it's something that engages the hearts and minds of your audience and enables them to know, like, and trust you. Now, that's true of a story in its own right. And the know, like, trust is important, because if people don't know who you are, or they don't like you, or they don't trust you, then it's going to be really hard to persuade them to influence them the way you would like to. And the story message takes that power of a story and gets that over in less than 18 seconds. And everything else is just delivery and packaging. A bit like when you order a gift for somebody online, then fine, you do need good delivery, you do need good packaging. But if the gift itself isn't any good, then great delivery service and great packaging isn't going to help you. So the next question is, why don't we tell our stories? The interesting thing that I've found is that everybody has a story to tell. And journalists know this. There's a story in absolutely everything and in every situation. Sales and marketing people, of course, know this too. But time and time again, I find I used to not tell stories, and I find that so many people at all sorts of levels don't realize how powerful it would be, and they don't tell their stories. So why not? Well, one of the most common things is that we're often too analytical. In the management and the business world, we focus on tangibles, we focus on facts and figures, features and benefits. That's all good, firm stuff. And then we leave out the emotions. And strangely, in many, many industries, there's a perception and a feeling that emotions don't belong in business. That's not true everywhere. Nobody actually ever tells anybody you can't have emotions in business, but somehow we get this feeling that it's somehow unprofessional to be emotional, somehow would be out of control, or it's inappropriate. So now, obviously, there are emotions that belong in our private lives, that belong in movies, but they don't belong in work. But of course, when we stop and think, there are plenty of emotions that are important and relevant to our professional lives. And quick question, what sort of emotions? Have a quick think. What sort of emotions are relevant to our professional lives? Quite simply, things like success, the joy of success, fear of failure, pride, liking, jealousy. They're all powerful emotions, and they're all part of our everyday business and managerial world. Now, you notice in some of those success and failure, there are positive and negatives. And that brings me to a third bit, which is possibly the most important, on one of the reasons why we don't, or one emotion that we don't want to bring in, is talking about failure. Everybody has a kind of fear of getting found out. It's important to say that absolutely everybody has had failures. And if you listen to the top people and the successful people, they will tell you about their failures. But actually, for the rest of us, we kind of don't want to get found out. We don't want to seem to have failed. So guess what? We don't want to talk about them. But a question for yourselves to consider, does talking about failure make you more or less credible? And I think you can guess what I'm going to say, is actually if you talk about failure in a constructive manner, it makes you more credible and not less. It actually works to your advantage and not to your disadvantage. So those are the three main reasons why we don't tell our stories. We go all left-brained and we're too analytical. We somehow think that emotions don't belong in business, and we don't like talking about our failures. So what if we had an easy way to create fast, powerful stories? Well, these are the 5 steps that I use. I've tried to give them fancy names to make them more like a story in their own right. And I'll take you through those steps quickly. These are the steps that I go through, and I have already used one today for a live situation that I have with a client at the moment. And step 1 is somebody's watching you. And what I mean by that, think through who's the audience, who's going to be receiving this, think about their needs and tailor the story and the events to their needs. That might seem fairly obvious, but the number of times I see people not doing it, then it does need underlining. Step 2, I've called uncover a skeleton. Where was the challenge? Where was the problem? Where was the body? And in the more conventional presentation techniques, they'll talk about situation and complication. Well, this is where you bring the situation and the complication in. You describe the background. Then in the third step, we bring the emotion into it. Who are the bad guys? Who are the good guys? And what I mean by that, it might not necessarily be individual people. We're looking for villains, we're looking for heroes, but these also could be competitors, it could be situations, it could be new legislation, it could be things, but you build in either some kind of a hero or some kind of a villain to bring in that emotion. And then, of course, we use data in step 4. I call it outnumbered. Don't outnumber them. Don't use too much data. I'm sure many of you will have seen or see regularly TED's talks. One key thing you will notice that, with some very few exceptions, the speakers will focus on a very small amount of data, often just around 1 or 2 pieces of data. There is one fantastic exception, the late, great Hans Rosling, who did data visualization, absolute genius. He could do 10,000 pieces of data in 4 minutes and still make it fantastic. But for the rest of us normal people, very, very few people can do what Hans Rosling used to be able to do. So the rest of us, we need to focus in on a very small amount of data. Don't overload them. And the last part then is decide on the ending. Does the story end with a happy end? Do they land in paradise? Or is it a warning? Is it an unhappy end? Is it a tragedy? Does something go horribly wrong? Decide on your ending. So those are 5 simple steps. Somebody's watching you, decide your audience, uncover the skeleton, what was the problem and complication, sort out the emotions, get the heroes and villains in there, don't use too much data, and decide a happy or a tragic ending. So now, what are my 3 big secrets? Well, the first one is what I call the 3 times 18 rule. I prepare an 18-second summary. I prepare an 180-word short story, and I allow 18 minutes for a talk or presentation. Now, I don't necessarily do them in that order, but I do use them in all cases, whether I'm doing a presentation or whether I'm doing it in an informal setting. I use those 3 steps to prepare and boil down the story. And I may start out with a much longer version and pare and reduce it down to an 18-second summary, 180-word story, and an 18-minute talk. And the other 2 secrets are: talk about your struggles, talk about your failures, talk about show how you overcame them. And finally, be authentic. It's very, very easy to make up a story that's not true. It's very, very easy to bring in things that are not true. But if you do that and you get found out, then your credibility will go. So be authentic, be yourself. So that at 18 minutes is the first part of my presentation. And what I'd like to do now for the next 15 minutes or so is just outline 3 very different stories that I've come across. Because I think these will help show you how you can use them, and 1 or 2 of the pitfalls, 1 or 2 of the things that we can avoid. So there'll be 3 stories. There'll be the gas man, there will be the 1960 Baseball World Series, and there will be the data whisperer. So the gas man. This is the one I talked about at the beginning, how my friend Pete used one simple story to raise $10 million. So here's my 18-second story. You can read it, but I'll just read this one to you. Peter needed to raise 10 million for his next mining project, exploring for gas. While his competitors all talked of yields, costs and returns, Peter told investors the story of a real Chinese girl, her struggles, and how his project was helping her future. He got his funding. Now, what I'll do on this is the 180-word version of this, and rather than repeat it, I will leave it on the screen for a few seconds. I will drink a quick glass of water, and I will give you a few seconds just to read that yourselves. Okay, I hope that's long enough, and if it wasn't, then let me know afterwards. So let's think about the differences. Clearly, Peter's competitors were all very experienced people, very capable people, but who used better data? Well, the others certainly used more data. Who used better graphics? Well, the quality of graphics was probably equal on both sides. But who made an emotional connection in an environment that is incredibly unemotional and hard-nosed? I don't think you can get any less hard-nosed than investment bankers and savvy, clever pensioners who want to invest their money. And he managed to make an emotional connection with them. So the second story I'd like to share with you is about baseball. And it's two stories of the 1960 World Series. First of all, I have to tell you, I know nothing about baseball. I don't even understand the rules. But I was recently reading a book which demonstrated how you can tell a fantastic story in an environment where it's very, very data heavy. So the book I was reading was by my favorite author, Bill Bryson, and the book's called The Life and Times of the Thunderbolt Kid. And in this book, he's describing how his journalist father was a fantastic baseball reporter and how he could bring it to life. And what it really made me think is that what little I do know about baseball is they have lots and lots of statistics. They have lots and lots of data. So what I did is that graphic on the left-hand side, I Googled an infographic on the 2017 World Series. I believe it's in Spanish. I certainly don't understand all the statistics, but you can see it's very, very data heavy. So the point Bill Bryson was making was that in conventional reporting of the day, he gave the example of how the New York Times reported in a fairly dull tones. And of course, there were lots of statistics and tables presented. I'm sure you'll be familiar with those. They all look a bit modern in this day and age. But if I give you a couple of seconds just to read through how the New York Times had described it. And now I'll take you to how Bill Bryson's father wrote about it. And I don't want to spoil it by reading it to you, so I'll give you a few more seconds to read that as well. Okay, once again, I hope that's been enough. There will be a copy available afterwards, so you should be able to read it then. So now, of course, the rest of us might not have the brilliant wordsmith skills that Bill Bryson's father had, but I think you might agree with me that that story was a lot more powerful, a lot more engaging, and used a lot less data. So let's go back to the infographic. Now, it is a beautiful graphic. It's beautifully done. I wish I could do things like that and make them half as good. They're brilliant. It's a whole mine, a data mine of information. But is it engaging? Is it easy to read? And is it inspiring? And the message for me is I see so many management presentations at all sorts of levels, which have got lots of data, but they're not easy to read, they're not engaging, and they're certainly not inspiring. So come to the third story, the data whisperer. And this is all about a consultant colleague who was worried about, he was a data expert, or still is a data expert, did fantastic analysis in the financial services sector. Clients absolutely loved what he did, but he was worried about becoming pigeonholed just as a data expert. So what he did is he replaced his CV with his story. And if you look at the graphic on the screen, I've just taken a typical LinkedIn profile. I'm sure you're all familiar with LinkedIn. I'm sure you're all familiar with that standard format. It's pretty standard and it's pretty unexciting. And this is, so what he did, he took away all that and replaced the CV with a story. And a month later, he got a new job and his promotion. And this was his 180-word story that he used on his CV. And again, I'll give you a few seconds just to read that in your own time. Okay, I hope that was enough time. What I personally like about this, and what it really did for Tom, was it brought out his enthusiasm and his genuine passion. I know the word passionate is, of course, very much overused, but it brought out his real enthusiasm for the data and control. It also enabled him to talk about his setback. Obviously, if he wanted to become an airline pilot growing up, and wasn't able to do it, then that's a struggle, a setback, and a real disappointment. And it actually gave him personally that process of talking about it and putting it into that framework, enabled him to actually use it as, it enabled him to put it to bed and get it behind him and actually go, hey, it all works, it all fits. And he felt great about himself. So actually, he was part of the audience of his own story. And it worked brilliantly for him. So those were 3 stories with 3 little examples, which I hope have given you food for thought and hope and give you some ideas that you can use in your everyday situations where you want to and where you need to have more influence. Excuse me, I'll just have to stop now. And finally, excuse me, I'll just have to stop there. Just to wrap up, the last part is what I hope I've been able to show you today is a useful tool, how leaders motivate by turning their message into a powerful and compact short story message. Just to give you and explain why we get it so wrong, and then 5 simple steps to a faster and more powerful motivation and leadership skills. So once I've managed to shut my pet dog up, I'll take some questions.
Well, thank you very much, Julian, for a very interesting presentation. Folks, now we're open for question and answer. So if you have any questions, you could either insert it in the question box, or you could equally raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on the console, so please click on it if you want to have a direct audio conversation with Julian. But let me go straight to the question box. There are a couple of them already posted. One from Brother Sami Al-Tijui. The question is, what should I do if there is no story?
Can you still hear me?
You can, and Julian, I've started the question and answers. I understand that you have given us the permission to go through Q&A. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, sorry about that. I had
all right.
First of all, interruption on the technical.
No worries.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, we can hear you okay. And there's a question popped up, so I asked on behalf of Brother Sami Al-Tijui. The question is, what should I do if there's no story at all?
The answer might sound a bit difficult. There's always a story. You have to look at it and find it. So how do you do that? Well, if there is a situation that almost by default, something that's a problem or a complexity, then there will be a story in it. And perhaps maybe I could just help with the one that I had to do this morning, where it's in a manufacturing organization, and we're putting some new financial processes for them to monitor that. They'd had a new product introduction and things had gone wrong, and that caused a lot of stress and a lot of problems in the organization. So whereas it may be conventionally, you could just say, well, we're putting a new process, we're going to report differently, and here are the numbers, which would be kind of more conventional. What we do in the story is actually focus on the emotional side of it, the stress that it caused the organization, the problems that it's caused for the staff working together, and you build on that angle. So basically, any situation that's got some kind of a complexity or difficulty, there will be an emotion in there, and you can build the story around that. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much. And let me move to another question. We have, are story messages just anecdotes?
No, they're like anecdotes, but they have a powerful structure and they have a clear focus. So they have a clear objective. Okay. People often like to tell anecdotes, but they can be too random. And the difference here is to have a structure to it so that you've got the power of the story in there.
Alrighty, and another one from Nimish Vora. The question is, how can some lenders get convinced by story and emotions when they can be challenged in system of hard, real numbers internally? Sure.
The key to that is to also have the numbers below that. So that in Peter's situation, he had all the graphs, he had all the facts and figures. Clearly, if you present just a great story and you haven't got the facts to back it up, then you will at that point then get found out. So that's quite important. Some of you may be familiar with an old classic management work, Barbara Minto, the pyramid principle. You use it in that context. So you make sure that you've got the hard facts to back it up.
Thank you very much. And another one, where else can a story message be used?
You can actually use it in all types of organizations, all types of situations. You can use it in your private life, but I think we'd probably be getting off subject there. You can use it in change management. You can use it in preparing a corporate story. You can use it in interviews. Perhaps the best example I've seen it in a corporate story was a company I was dealing with a few years ago. They'd been a major automotive supplier. They lost a huge contract, and they used lean management techniques to turn the business around, to transform it from being an automotive supplier to a third-party logistics. They'd grown it to a 10,000 employee organization, and they actively used that story and their struggles to position themselves with all their customers and with all their staff. And they lived and walked, moved, talked, breathed that simple story. The other place you can use them is in interviews. If you're interviewing or being interviewed, you can use it both ways.
All right, perfect. So let me move to callers who raised a hand. We have the first caller. Let me try to unmute Mr. Atikur Rahman. You have raised your hand, but you have self-muted yourself. You kindly unmute. Okay, let me see. Yes, I've been unable to unmute you. You're self-muted, Mr. Atikur Rahman. If you can unmute yourself. Okay, yes. Could you please introduce yourself and ask the question?
Yes, I am Atikur Rahman. I am head of marketing and administration in a university. My question is that in the story, you were mentioning about some hero or villain. Is it necessary that we have a hero or villain situation?
Not 100% success necessary, but it's important to have the emotional aspect of the challenge brought in. And so it might not be a person. It might be, again, it might be some reform in the university structures. I know in the United Kingdom, the universities over the last few years have had to work a lot harder to market themselves. So if somebody, a colleague of yours in the UK may now have the problem that they're having to find completely new ways of getting people to attend their courses. So the villain in that case could have been the decline in fees or the change in the government structures. You could use it like that. Does that help?
Thank you, Mr. Rahman, for the question, but you have again self-muted yourselves. Is it?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for asking the question. And let me move to another caller who's raised a hand. We have Dr. Muhammad Rashad Freedy. Dr. Muhammad, please introduce yourself. You're a regular caller, but please introduce and ask the question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dr. Muhammad Rashad Freedy. I'm an assistant professor in the public university in Saudi Arabia. And thank you for a good presentation. And I understand storytelling is a very powerful tool in terms of persuasion and in terms of engaging with the relationship, and it impacts on accelerating the emotional impact also. But while speaking from the term of the academics perspective, like when we have the case-based teaching and learning in our academic environment, so is the case-based teaching different from the storytelling, or is it storytelling is embedded into the case? Or can you clarify on that?
Well, first of all, thank you for the feedback, the nice feedback. Appreciate that. But I would build the story aspect into the case study element, so that I would think for every case study you could do, you could build that story into it.
Yeah, because
don't know that.
Is there any differentiation? Like, is it a difference between a case study and a storytelling, or is it?
I think the only difference is that probably the main difference could be. I mean, would be that in a case study, you could have case studies that just don't have any emotional part or emotional aspect to them. Amusingly, I hope, on the consulting case study side, my profession produces the worst case studies ever, and we do it all the time, and they're awful. because we simply just put up a bit of a background, we put up some facts, some figures, some numbers, and then we show what we did, and they're terrible. Now, obviously, in the teaching environment, I wouldn't see any difficulty at all in adding those emotional elements to that.
I got you. Yeah, I assume that you have to have three things, like the 3 E's we tell our students. Like the 3 E's are engaging, entertaining, and exciting my students. And perhaps storytelling may be a good tool to embark upon it.
Yes, I think so. And storytelling generally, and then it's just the emphasis on speed. Obviously, if you've got different situations, but we don't have time for very long stories, so we've got to get them in there quickly. But yes, it's a technique that will help you make it fulfill the 3 E's, which, by the way, I've just written down because I think that's really quite good.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ali, for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Doctor, for asking the question. And all right, one last question, Julian. Any quick recommendations on how to quickly depict the story through social media, posters, banners, or videos?
I think there's a skill to that in its own right. I think your selection of your image has got to be emotional and powerful. So I would then, going about it in a structured way, I would decide what that emotion was, and I would select a simple image around that. So if, for instance, the threat or the emotion in the story was the stress of failure or the fear of failure, I would use an image related to fear of failure. And I would then, in social media, you've really got less than your 140 characters of Twitter. I would work hard at getting that statement into well under 140 characters that gets it in. And the way I try and do that is I start with a longer one and edit and re-edit and edit and re-edit until I can get that emotion I want into a very short sentence. I hope that helps.
Well, yes, thank you very much. And that really brings us towards the end of the webinar. So I really want to thank you, but also any quick concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss out.
Well, from my side, thank you for the opportunity. I hope you found it helpful, and I would welcome any feedback and anything, also critical feedback, anything you felt that could have been explained better or you disagree with, then feel free to get in touch, and I'm happy to discuss that further.
Well, thank you very much once again. I really want to thank you on behalf of the Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship for taking the time to deliver this very, very intriguing presentation. So once again, thank you very much. And,
okay, thank you.
And yeah, thank you very much. Thank you all of those who participated in this webinar. We are recording it, so please stay tuned to webinar.mile.org to learn about our upcoming programs, or equally to access the recorded versions. With that note, I would like to end and conclude. So you all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are calling from. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much.